The doors of the Pan-Galactic Council did not open, they surrendered. Ambassador Kethavar entered with the slow dignity of a man who had outlived his youth, and to his surprise, his certainties. He carried no guards, only a palm-sized crystal that held the last conversation his people would ever have with the quiet blue world on the holo above. It spun, ordinary and innocent as a child's marble. The chamber murmured. Primes and elders debated taxation, trade, the moral status of uplifted fauna, until Kethavar's voice cut across the civility like sand on polished glass. Honored counselors, stay away from the human sphere. Laughter rippled, practiced, and polite. The heaviest laugh belonged to High Admiral Vexther, a monument to victories won by other men. 6 eyes like burning coals, a chest full of medals for battles he had never had to learn from. "Ambassador," he rasped, "your reptilian folk hid behind living ships and pacifist treaties. You expect the hegemony to fear welders and farmers." Kethavar did not flare or hiss. He lifted the crystal. The holo fractured into a ballet of wreckage. Long silver arcs of Sci-Fi biovessels, ruptured and curling like dead leaves, dots of human craft that looked like scrap glued to rockets. We went to their system to quarry ice. They answered with physics. Where we raised shields, they raised mass. Where we had doctrine, they had intent. He told them what the recordings would show anyway: cargo hulls packed with fission fire, Territon asteroids nudged years in advance, station frames unbolted into spears, a traffic grid that at a whisper became artillery. He told them of voices on open channels, calm, wry, sometimes laughing, not because they loved death, but because they had chosen a thing bigger than fear. He said this with no drama, as a physician might deliver a diagnosis. He quoted one pilot, "Target acquired, Sarah. This will hurt them more than it hurts us. See you on the other side." Fleet Commander Cormys, crystalline and thoughtful, asked the sensible question, "Couldn't you retreat?" "We tried," Kethavar said. "We retreated from where the humans had already calculated we would retreat. Every door led to another door they had mapped." He breathed. "We lost 30 ships. They spared 1 escape pod. Their mercy was a broadcast." Faces shifted. Vexthers did not. "Stories," he said, standing. "There are always stories about frontier demons. We will audit this rumor at the source." His officers rose, a rustle of uniforms and certainty. Kethavar changed the holo again. The small blue marble now wore faint halos, orbital foundries, dark sky arrays, belts of numbered stone. "Note the pattern density along their ecliptic," he said. "Note the tug burns on outer system ice. They have rehearsed. They have integrated civilian infrastructure with defense in a way tyrannies cannot. They do not rely on secret weapons. They rely on public habits. That is harder to break." A junior counselor scoffed. "Primitive saturation tactics, wasteful." "Physics is not primitive," Kethavar answered. "It is indifferent. Their poorest ships weigh 10,000 tons. Your finest shields cannot argue with that." He offered the Rakathi example, a hive that, by design, did not fear, forced to learn terror when humans captured a few nodes and fed the network pain that wasn't there. They turned unity into panic. They studied their enemy's strength until it failed by its own logic. Vexther's mandibles clicked. "Enough, the 4th Fleet sails." "Admiral," Kethavar said softly, "do not mistake restraint for weakness. They held back to teach us what fear feels like." He looked around the amphitheater, "and to see which of us can learn." The council hummed on. Motions were filed, committees scheduled. Vexther left to gather the 4th Fleet. The doors surrendered again. Kethavar stood alone under the image of Earth, and wondered if any empire had ever survived learning too late that another people had taken history, not technology, as their decisive advantage. He forwarded the warning to every neutral registry he could bribe. Across the quiet between stars, a different voice answered in English, simple and steady. Message received. That night he studied human texts. He found tragedies, constitutions, sermons. He found a line he copied into his notes for the council. We hold these truths to be self-evident. He suspected the hegemony would not like what came after such sentences. 6 months later, the Fourth Fleet arrived at the edge of the human sun. 300 ships unfurled radiators and doctrine like banners. Vexthor stood before a viewport designed to make leaders feel enormous. A transmission stitched itself into their band as casually as a neighbor's knock. Unknown vessels, the woman said, voice clean of strain. This is Admiral Chen, United Earth Defense Force. You are entering sovereign space. Turn back. Vexthor smiled with his mandibles. Open a channel. He announced relocation protocols and mercy quotas, the moral arithmetic of empires. Chen listened, did not argue, only replied with a sentence that sounded like an old American proverb hammered into steel. We tried kindness, you thought it was weakness. We tried patience, you called it fear, so we stopped. The first 24 human ships broke formation and burned. Hegemony batteries fired, space stitched with white spears. The human hulls took hits that should have ended their stories and kept riding. They bled atmosphere like banners, burned and burned forward. Ramming, Grexmer squeaked. Primitive theater, Vexthor said, record the footage. The lead human ship struck Starcrusher amidships. Night briefly became day. The second impact followed before instruments recalibrated. Then the third. 20 ships gone in minutes, replaced by clouds of hot testimony. The sensor deck scrolled lost names like a memorial wall. Chen's voice returned, flatter now, as if reading numbers from an invoice. 24 ships, 50 volunteers each, 1,200 human lives. By your own registers, your last 20 ships carried about 40,000 souls. We invest, we expect returns. The bridge went very quiet. Somewhere deep in the hull, a bulkhead groaned like an old cathedral. Vexthor ordered evasive patterns. Patterns are only useful when your opponent hasn't studied your handwriting. The 24 had not been a charge. They were keys turning in a lock. From behind asteroids and obsolete platforms drifted 400 more signatures. Uncrewed this time, Burns' card, indifferent to pain, each on an intercept that had been calculated against every standard hegemony dodge learned in a century of victorious wars. Admiral Chen added, this is the first wave built by human hands. The rest were built by time. We've been placing stone for 50 years. Sensors caught the whole system wake up. Tugs on ice in the outer dark. Old satellites coming alive like toys in a forgotten attic. The inner world brightened. Factories retooled mid-shift, grids surged, cities dimmed, and then flared as if the planet had decided to breathe fire. Grexmer's console reported a 3,000% industrial spike. Vexthor dismissed it as error until the next screen and the next. Civilians rerouted power, universities dimmed, stadiums became barracks. Why would they burn their world to save it? An officer whispered. Americans once called it total war, Chen said almost gently. Not against people, against the idea that people can be owned. She didn't cite books, but the cadence carried lessons from old scars. A nation that studies them becomes hard to bully. They tried to jam the human channels. Snatches of English cut through, check bearing Delta 7. Vector solve locked. When a cruiser clipped a drone and celebrated, 7 smaller shapes unfolded from the debris, each guiding itself into a different sheet of armor. One officer whispered, "They turned failure into shrapnel into guidance." Vexthor sought comfort in doctrine. Center fire on their largest vessels. The gunnery chief obeyed. It changed nothing. The largest vessels were decoys built to soak attention, while the math happened elsewhere. Chen's voice returned to offer an education Vexthor had not applied for. We learned to fight each other for 4 centuries. The lesson was not how to hate, it was how to plan. The plan is not the map. The plan is the discipline to redraw the map faster than the enemy can memorize it. Earth's night side bloomed with coordinated blackouts. Regions dimmed to feed launch loops, then brightened to feed hospitals. "We'll repay the time," Chen said softly, as if answering a child directly. "We always repay." When the first wave finished its work, the uncrewed storm took over. No grief, no wavering, only efficiency. They were uglier than hegemony craft. Beauty had never saved a city. Vexthor looked small in his vast viewport. He told himself legends about last stands. The board told a different story. 1 more hour of this pace and prestige would be a synonym for wreckage. His pride negotiated with his fear and lost. Signal terms. Chen's reply contained no triumph. "Admiral, the terms are unchanged. Turn back now. Your dead will stay dead, your living may live. You came to sell fear, we don't buy." He cut the channel and stared at Earth. It did not look angry, only organized. The battle did not crescendo, it clarified. Impact by impact, the fleet's illusions boiled away, leaving math and metal. Vexthor discovered that the worst part of being outplanned is not dying. It is living long enough to understand the plan. On wideband, Admiral Chen narrated like a patient teacher. "Every rock larger than a house is numbered. Every orbit is rehearsed. We built our defense out of chores and calendars. Empires invest in spectacle, Admiral. Democracies invest in logistics." Across the views, automated barges split into bouquet clusters, each petal a guidance package hugging a predicted evasive curve. Mining frames separated, long spears preloaded with rotation. Comets shed skins. Inside were engines the color of old warehouse paint. Wreckage struck wreckage, making the rubble bounce, turning yesterday's victory into today's swarm. Vexthor tried to turn the narrative back to technology. "We have superior firepower." "You have superior equipment," Chen corrected. "We have superior homework." She let silence carry the sting. "This is called cost imposition. We chose a fight we could afford at scale, and then we forced you to buy it at our price." From the system's night edge, Fleet Commander Cormies opened a channel. "Admiral Chen, the Dominion maintains non-interference. Permission to observe." "You already have it," Chen said. "You're the only person in range who seems interested in empiricism." The line crackled. Cormies glimpsed Chen's bare metal bridge and a wall of volunteer names, not just bodies but minds. Vexthor tried a new tactic. "You cannot sustain this." "We designed it not to need sustaining," Chen replied. "We plan to run on momentum, physical and moral. When your doctrine says press and every press opens a door we balanced yesterday, you stop pressing." Her tone changed. "And yes, we are salvaging your shields, your drives, your mistakes. We learned a long time ago to turn other people's contempt into curriculum." On another day, Vexthor might have admired that line. Today he watched his favorite destroyer die to a repurposed mining town named Persistence. Cormys sent a private band. Admiral Chen, when this ends, what then? You cannot remain a fortress forever. We never intended to, Chen said. Quarantine was never fear. It was study. You don't step into history until you're ready not to be eaten by it. She paused. 6 months from now, we will leave this system in ships that carry what you brought us, remixed through our stubbornness. We will go to the places your maps color red and ask those people a question no one strong ever asks them. Do you want to be free? The room's temperature seemed to drop. On hegemony command loops, sub-admirals began composing alibis for councils that would no longer seat them. The Fourth Fleet kept dying, slower now, as reports and last messages stacked up undelivered. No one laughed at the old proverb about hubris. Hegemony academies had taught that morale follows material. Today the causality reversed. As human volunteer nets lit with notes from teachers, machinists, grandparents, the uncrewed formations flew with a steadiness no whip could command. Command tried a last stratagem, randomization orders to fling ships in irrational paths. Randomness is only effective against planners who revere elegance. The humans had planned for ugly. Observe Sector K9, Chen instructed as if lecturing a class. We seeded that field 12 years ago with 10,000 screws. You laughed at our junk orbits. Each screw is now a sensor. Each sensor feeds a solver. The solver feeds a burn that turns your evasion into recoil. The broadcast wasn't taunt, it was syllabus. Cormys made a decision and recorded it for her own council. The Dominion would not enter the inner system. She also recorded a second memo labeled Ethics. In it, she wrote that deterrence is a kind of teaching, and that humans appeared to have learned to teach without delighting in cruelty. She added, "They are frightening precisely because they want to be decent." Salvage began before the last shot cooled. Humans knew where every useful fragment would drift because they had written the drift. Tugs with cheerful names, Rosa, Douglas, Harriet, plucked shield facets and drive cores with a delicacy that would have pleased a jeweler. Back on Earth, universities queued research proposals. How to adapt crystalline armor to ocean desalination. How to repackage compact reactors as remote clinics. War, turned inside out, could fund civics. Vexthor sent one final message meant not for Chen but for history: we surrender. The answer came as policy rather than emotion. Noted. Withdraw now, leave your dead. We will return them with names attached. Nothing about triumph, everything about procedure. Somewhere in those procedures lived the reason tyrannies lose to republics more often than their mythmakers admit. Records, accountability, the decision to make grief legible. Grexmer looked at his admiral and for the first time saw a man whose classroom had failed him. The fighting lasted 18 hours. After the last hegemony, hull flashed white and then black. Silence returned. The deep, woolen kind that follows a choir's final note. The debris did not look like victory. It looked like raw material for policy. Salvage beams stitched a new constellation where an armada had been. On the Dominion flagship, Cormys stood in that light and understood why some histories call certain battles births. Chen appeared again, uniform scorched, voice hoarse. "Commander Cormys, please carry a message to your council and to anyone who still keeps ledgers where people's names should be. Earth's quarantine is over." "What does that mean in your doctrine?" Cormys asked. "It means the thing tyrannies fear most," Chen said. "A patient people who has done its homework." She pivoted a camera to show orbital slips where ungainly hulls were being replaced by sleeker angles that hinted at new math. In 3 months, our first interstellar class leaves dock. We will not conquer. We will visit. We will offer the same bargain to every oppressed world: independence with protection or isolation without our help. We will not force liberation. She offered the Dominion a contract: safe passage for refugees, recognition of new republics, trade as trust. Who gave you the right? Cormys asked. History, Chen said, and failure, 400 years of ours. We built a culture that remembers its worst days on purpose. We teach children about Selma and Sarajevo and the camps, not to live there but to inoculate them against forgetting. An old American preacher said the moral arc bends toward justice. It does not bend by itself. Salvage tugs pulled a hegemony shield emitter from a drifting spine. A professor reminded students that learning from an enemy is not the same as becoming one. Cormys watched the first orbital seminars open: municipal finance, courts, clean water, a war fleet that taught civics. 6 months later, the council floor was a map of anxieties. Merchant guilds feared disruption. Client empires feared audits. Old powers feared the shame of being seen. Kethavar's updates made fear practical. 31 worlds voted for independence. Human teams arrived with teachers, engineers, mediators. Debates snarled until someone asked about force. The envoy promised small patrols, co-crewing by locals, filmed arrests, detentions logged in a cross-species ledger, courts publishing appeals. No empire in the chamber had ever tied its own hands in public. That tilted the vote. A few denounced American moral theater. Kethavar shrugged. The theater where the script is law tends to run longer. The eyes carried. Cormys signed a trade compact before she left the planet. It bound the Dominion to safe corridors, exchanges capped to prevent dependency, and a promise written in language so plain it almost hurt: we will not help you rule anyone against their will. On the way back to her ship, she passed a school under a temporary dome. Children, alien and human, recited a thin booklet: rights, duties, limits. A little one stumbled on dignity, and the old teacher tried again. Cormys realized the most dangerous weapon was not ramming mass. It was a curriculum. Below the balcony, industry sang a new key. Above it, the blue world spun. The envoy tucked a copy of their charter into Kethavar's satchel. He took it like a man taking a small, warm stone from a river, and knowing it would anchor his pocket for the rest of his days. They called the planet Varen a logistics jewel. Flat continents laid out like an engineer's draft, harbors that drank sunlight, rivers that obeyed the briefest of dams. Under hegemony rule, it had been repurposed into a neat lattice of extraction, or out, labor in, voice off. The first United Earth interstellar class ship, USV Harriet, arrived with escorts that looked half familiar and half new. Human angles fused to captured hegemony smoothness, welds where theory shook hands with practice. Admiral Chen stood on a quiet bridge and let someone else speak first. Not a general, a teacher. The broadcast opened with a simple sentence: "We are here to ask a question, not to give an order." In the bays below, engineers rehearsed tasks that felt like prayers: filters for dirty water, clinics for dirty air, packets of law translated into Varen glyphs. It took empires centuries to turn dignity into jargon. The humans had decided to translate it into plumbing and courts. Varen's governor expected fireworks, not paperwork. He deployed the old theater, columns, banners, salutes, to face an enemy whose first barrage was a civic registry. Earth's diplomats, Ambassador Isabel Rodriguez among them, requested transparent roles, names, sentences, property seizures. "You may refuse," she said with courtroom calm, "but understand the math. Freedom without records is theater. We propose a ledger the frightened can trust." 3 million Varan citizens gathered under sunsilver canopies and listened to an offer that sounded like rumor: independence with protection or isolation without harassment. No tax, no tribute, no governor imposed by foreign hands. Conditions were specific: a Bill of Rights, a court reviewable by outsiders, an independent press, a right of exit for anyone who chose to leave. "We will not tell you who to worship, how to marry, what to build," Rodriguez said. "We will insist that arrests are named and trials are filmed." The first vote did not go the way vid stories like to go. 47% fearful, cautious, loyal to routines that had not yet killed them, chose to keep the governor. 44 chose independence. 9 wavered. Commentators in the council chamber smirked. The humans had misread the appetite of the oppressed. Chen did not blink. "Democracy isn't music that always resolves," she told her staff. "It is scales played daily." So Earth stayed, but not as conquerors. The Harriet inflated clinics. 1,000 Varan apprentices learned to maintain ion scrubbers while their mothers attended classes in municipal finance. A Truth and Ledger Commission opened its doors, not to punish collaborators with a purge, but to teach a lesson older than rockets: reconciliation is cheaper than feuds. Names were spoken, apologies recorded, restitution measured not only in prison days but in hours of labor for public goods, roads, schools, water. The governor spoke on the third week. He had expected liberation or invasion. He received procedures. "You reduce revolution to bureaucracy," he said, almost insulted. Rodriguez smiled. "We elevate bureaucracy to ethics. In our worst centuries, America learned to make paperwork the leash on power. We intend to export that boring miracle." The 9% moved first. They liked clean water, reliable lights, the way the Harriet's hospital called patients by their names and not by numbers. They liked that the press asked rude questions and the soldiers did not answer them. When a human sergeant broke a local law, drunk, trespass, an ugly incident outside a bar, Chen did not hide him. She walked him into a Varan courtroom and sat through the sentence. The cameras chewed on the image. A general watching her own soldier be fined and shamed by strangers. The governor made a mistake then. He tried to use the scene for propaganda. The feed cut to a split screen. On one side, his speech, on the other, a child drinking clear water for the first time. Marketing lost its category. The next vote arrived like weather. 71% chose independence. The governor stared at numbers truer than banners. He requested asylum, and after a hearing recorded in the ledger, received it not as a privilege but as a consequence of rules he had signed to avoid being dragged out by a mob. The Varan Charter passed. It was thin, almost an embarrassment to the Baroque constitutions of older powers. It said, "No secret laws, no nameless prisons, the right to leave, the right to return." Kethavar visited the new public square. Children recited not pledges but procedures: how to file a complaint, how many signatures recall a council member, what to do when the water board errs. He copied a sentence into his notebook. "We turned rebellion into routines." Under a scaffolding of small promises, Varan began to look less like a jewel and more like a place. On departure, Chen kept a ritual. She stood alone under the viewport and whispered 3 names from the Fourth Fleet dead. Ransom paid, she said to no one, dividends collected. In the council chamber the vote tallies scrolled. Empires measured power in tonnage. Markets measured it in price. The humans measured it in exit lanes and ledgers. Varen's flag was not beautiful, it was legible. The humans did not only seek easy cases. The next world, Aurelius, cut channels into the desert until they looked like handwriting. Its ruler wore elections like armor. He boasted of stability and order, words tyrants teach at lullaby volume. His prisons were clean. His newspapers were funny as long as the jokes bent one way. When Earth arrived, the stadium filled before the sun finished standing up. Rodriguez delivered the same offer in the same grammar. Independence with protection, or isolation without harassment. We do not recognize mandate by parade. Aurelius' ruler, Chancellor Kai, laughed. Your own history fought wars to spread what you call rights, he said. We choose a different path. We choose me. The vote, monitored by independent bots and a Dominion observation team, arrived ugly and authentic. 52% kept the Chancellor. Earth's feeds lit with disappointment and fury. Comment sections, galactic and human, crowed. The great liberators had been politely asked to leave. Chen addressed her people in a clip that civics teachers would replay for years. Friends, our doctrine is not we get our way. Our doctrine is consent. The right of a people to choose badly is part of the right to choose. But Chancellor Kai jails journalists. A young officer protested. He jails fewer when the world knows their names, Chen answered, and he jails none when his people stop clapping. Earth did not plant rebels, did not fund a civil war, did not slip guns into the alleys behind bakeries. Instead, the Harriet left an exit office in orbit. Counselor bots, legal aid, jobs on ships, scholarships off-world. Broadcasts carried not propaganda but comparisons. Budget sheets from Varen, hospital wait times, air particulate counts. Aurelius citizens learned a new arithmetic. Life beyond the borders didn't require treason, only paperwork. The brightest tended to leave first, the bravest sometimes stayed. The Chancellor learned that brain drain is an election you cannot jail. Aurelius schools requested exchange programs. Kai refused. Students applied anyway. Earth did not smuggle them out. Students used the exit office, signed their names, waved to cameras, and boarded the most boring ships in the sector. Bureaucracy became wire cutters. The Chancellor outlawed exit interviews. Dominion media aired them. Markets began to notice that investors prefer places where contracts survive an angry afternoon. Aurelius' election clock ticked like a heart monitor. The Dominion posted a wager board. The numbers moved slowly, then quickly. A bridge fell because inspectors were afraid to file a report. A mother's testimony went viral. A judge dismissed a case against a governor's nephew live on court cam, and the gavel sounded like a joke. The next vote turned soft menace into math. 61% for a coalition of people who had memorized the exit office's policies. They ran on a dangerous platform, boring. They promised audits, road repair, procurement reforms, FOIA with teeth. Chen refused a victory parade. We did not topple him, she told a Dominion anchor. His neighbors did. We put a door in the wall and stood aside. Kethavar walked through Aurelius' capital at dusk and felt a lesson precise as shipwright work. Deterrence is loud. Legitimacy is quiet. He wrote that sentence and underlined it twice. The Chancellor requested exile on a world with no extradition treaties. He received it, along with a long letter that listed the names of people still missing. He answered with silence. Sometimes justice is a ledger with a page left open on purpose. In classrooms where civics had been a pageant, teachers now drew diagrams, checks, balances, appeals. Children practiced a line that sounded like a paradox and felt like adulthood. I might be wrong. Empires founded on certainty find that sentence obscene. Republics build it into mirrors. As the Harriet jumped, Dominion commentators argued about method. Some called Earth cowardly, refusing to press advantage. Others called them frightening, refusing the narcotic of righteous conquest. Cormy's offered a phrase that traveled farther than she intended. They fight like engineers and govern like librarians. The compliment was not small. Libraries outlast banners. The hegemony did not die, it scattered. In the debris fields between minor suns, captains wore their old insignia like denial. One such holdout, Commander Yarick, decided to repair the empire with terror. He targeted Varen's new registry in a strike planned like a tantrum, dirty, theatrical, filmed for fear. The first warning came as a pattern in freight manifests. Human analysts noticed how boring had become a target. Pallets of printer paper, boxes of stamps, racks of cameras. The strike would not hit a palace, it would hit procedure. Chen convened a council that looked nothing like war. Engineers, a Varen judge, 3 Dominion lawyers, a poet who ran the water board because people who keep the water clean tend to know where the real risks lie. She asked what deterrence without humiliation might look like. "We can kill him," a captain said. "We often must," Chen agreed. "But first we should tell the universe why, and then let them watch us prove it." The trap unfolded like an audit. The registry moved to a decoy site whose biggest feature was a wall of windows and good microphones. The real servers lived under a clinic. When Yarick's corvette decloaked to begin its strike, a quiet volley disabled its drives and painted its hull with tags that read evidence. Boarding teams entered wearing cameras, not skulls. Every order began with a line that would one day be carved on the Varen Law School. For the record, they found prisoners, they found lists, they found a ledger of bribes the color of old teeth. They found a small child under a desk because bureaucracy sometimes hides the most frightened with the most dutiful. They walked Yarick out with less theater than a traffic stop and more gravity than a coronation. The trial sat under a dome where sunlit dust looked like prayer. Dominion observers took front rows. So did 2 hegemony lawyers who believed in law the way sailors believe in the sea. They complain about it and drown without it. Yarick mounted the usual defense: orders, necessity, civilization. The prosecutor answered with numbers and tapes, and with a sentence American students had been taught to memorize: "No person is above the law." A witness, an old clerk, spoke for the revolution Earth preferred. I filed a form, and this time someone had to answer it. Yarick's conviction mattered. The how mattered more. The court explained jurisdiction, evidence standards, the meaning of a recorded chain of custody. Afterwards, 1,000 worlds argued about Earth's audacity, claiming universal processes in a universe allergic to them. Earth did not yield the claim. "Standards are not imperial if they can be applied to us," Rodriguez said. She released the Harriet's own internal investigation logs, including 3 reprimands and 1 demotion for boarding actions conducted with sloppy documentation. The headlines were unglamorous. That was the point. A small riot flared outside the dome. Grief, not politics. Chen stood at a microphone and did the most radical thing a victorious general can do. She apologized for the collateral damage she could not avoid and named the dead. In another history, she said, you would have received statues. Here, you will receive a scholarship. The hegemony fragment swore revenge and found that very few ports admitted ships that were bad for business and worse for records. Insurance markets did what wars sometimes can't. They priced tyranny off the map. Cormie sent Chen an old Dominion proverb, trust grows slowly and then all at once. Chen replied with an American echo, sunlight is the best disinfectant. Between the proverbs ran cables of steel, public trials, published budgets, cameras that did not look away. Kethavar, who had grown up reciting prayers to order and longevity, watched the humans build the most subversive monument imaginable, a courthouse with more exits than entrances. You make it easier to leave power than to take it, he said. Rodriguez nodded. We design for graceful failure, she answered. Empires design for perfect success. Guess which survives reality? When the gavel fell, the crowd did not roar. They exhaled. The registry printed its first birth certificate under the charter. A clerk stamped the paper and cried exactly once. 6 months after Varen and Aurelius and the trial under the dust-lit dome, the council convened a congress of free worlds in an old port where water once mattered more than war. Ships arrived wearing new flags stitched onto old cloth. The agenda was rudely practical. Sewage, courts, the math of small republics. Admiral Chen spoke last. Generals often do when they mean to stay. She did not read a victory poem. She proposed a treaty written in fonts any child could read. It promised 3 things: the right of exit, the right of return, and the right to sea. No secret prisons, budgets published, trials recorded, patrols co-crewed by locals and foreigners together, each with veto power on the use of force. A clause the size of a footnote bound Earth's own hands. Violations by human personnel would be tried in public under the same lights. Some empires snorted, some cabinets hissed. Commerce listened. Insurance nodded. Refugees did the arithmetic and began to send back money labeled for schools instead of for escape. The Dominion signed first, grinning like a people who had invented markets and now discovered that consent scales better than fear. Kethavar, whose warning had once been a minority report, stood to speak. He told the chamber that he had misnamed the danger. The humans are not dangerous because they enjoy dying, he said. They are dangerous because they have decided how to live. They have made boring into a weapon. They have made records into armor. He cited an old human line the way a priest cites a verse. A more perfect union. Not a boast, a homework assignment. The room listened differently after that. Cormies presented the first civic satellites. Tiny platforms a child could visit by school bus VR, streaming budgets, court calendars, environmental data, and the health of fisheries. We intend to make corruption harder not with guns, she said, but with graphs. Someone laughed. Then they read the dashboards and stopped. Rodriguez delivered the clause that made tyrants itch, the right to leave a system, not a planet, a system. Citizenship that could be paused without treason. Empires built on captive markets suddenly felt old. Chen turned from microphone to seat. A junior officer whispered, "Admiral, they will write songs about you." Chen shook her head. "Write manuals. Manuals will keep them alive. Yarick's last loyalists attempted a broadcast during the final vote. Their jammer spat static that sounded like the past refusing to die. The Congress switched channels and kept counting. When the tally crossed the line, an ordinary cheer waved through the hall. No fireworks. A notice posted itself to docks and data screens. The Garden Treaty, adopted. Named not for Eden but for work, seasons, compost, tending. The metaphor offended war poets and delighted schoolchildren. After, Chen visited a small room where grief had been invited to sit. Names from the Fourth Fleet lined one wall. Names from Varen's bad months lined another. No rhetoric, only ledgers. She touched the letters like braille. Kethavar joined her. "You have made many enemies," he said. "We brought enough daylight to count them," she replied. "Counting is how you shrink monsters to size." Outside, a class of children from 5 species planted trees in soil that had once grown soldiers. Each sapling wore a tag: "Who waters this? Anyone. Who owns this? Everyone." A librarian led them in a quiet chant that might one day be mistaken for anthem. Rights, duties, limits, the rhythm of durable freedom. Cormies walked the port and realized what had been built here would look unimpressive from orbit. No dreadnoughts gliding like sermons. No banners arrogant as afternoon. Just cranes, clinics, schools, courts. She recorded a final memo to her council. "We have seen a new kind of power. It speaks in schedules and receipts. It frightens bullies and bores the brave. It may be the only kind that lasts." On departure day, the Harriet rose with less noise than a rumor and more consequence than a battle. Earth's quarantine had ended as a matter of policy, not swagger. The galaxy's new order did not march to drums. It walked to meetings. It stood in lines. It waited its turn. It kept receipts. It taught children to argue in public without fear. Somewhere far beyond the port, a small ship carried a box of Garden Treaty booklets to a world no map had named yet. The pilot adjusted course by a fraction and smiled at the math that would carry her there safely. Not genius, not luck, homework.